There's this idea that history is neat, that big movements, especially religions, just sort of happen, that their success was always a sure thing. But the truth? Well, the truth is almost always messier, more chaotic, and frankly, a lot more interesting.
And that brings us right to the heart of our story today, the Ridda Wars. This was Islam's very first civil war. It exploded right after the Prophet Muhammad died, and let me tell you, it came so close to tearing the entire faith apart. But instead, it ended up forging something completely new in the fire. So picture this. The year is 632 CE. The Prophet Muhammad, the man who was the absolute center of this new community, is dead. And in that sudden, deafening silence, the entire Arabian Peninsula is a powder keg ready to blow. This isn't just about mourning. It's a massive political crisis. The center of their world has just vanished. Yeah, think of it like an incredibly complicated knot. Muhammad was the one holding all the different threads together. You had ancient tribal pacts, deep personal loyalties, and in this brand new bond of a shared faith. But when he died, that knot didn't just loosen, it completely fell apart.
Now, the new leadership back in Medina, the capital, they had a very specific word for this unraveling. Ridda. It translates to apostasy. From where they stood, this was a full-blown betrayal of God's plan. But here's the thing. The tribes who were breaking away, they saw it in a completely different light.
So, why were they really rebelling? Well, for a lot of these tribes, their deal was with Muhammad the man, not with some new state. So when he died, they figured, hey, contract's over. Others just didn't see why they should send their local charity tax, the zakat, to some far-off capital. And of course, with a power vacuum, you suddenly have new prophets popping up, claiming they were getting revelations too. But really, at the core of it for so many, it was just a chance to be independent again.
With everything falling apart, the burden fell on one man, Abu Bakr. He was Muhammad's closest friend and now the first caliph. And he had a choice to make, a choice that would literally decide the future of Islam. Does he negotiate? Maybe let things become a looser alliance? Or does he use force to hold it all together?
And this slide really gets to the heart of the problem. You've got two completely different ways of seeing the world. Medina saw this as a rebellion against God. To them, religion and politics were the same thing. But for the tribes, this was just politics. A leader dies, you renegotiate your alliances. Simple as that. They weren't necessarily giving up their faith, they just wanted their political freedom back. These two worldviews were on a collision course, and there was no middle ground.
For Abu Bakr, there was no choice, really. He was convinced that any compromise, any negotiation would lead to the total disintegration of everything they had built. Even with some of his own advisors telling him to take it easy, he saw this as an all-or-nothing moment. To save the project, he chose war. So, the decision is made, and the job of putting Arabia back together by force falls to one of the most brilliant and most ruthless generals in history, Khalid ibn al-Walid. They called him the Sword of God. He was sent out to crush the rebellions. The time for talking was officially over. Khalid's campaigns were just a whirlwind of terrifying efficiency. But the absolute climax, the main event of the entire war, was the Battle of Yamama. This is where Khalid's army went up against the followers of another prophet, Musaylima, who had a huge following of his own. This wasn't just a battle, it was a showdown between two possible futures for Arabia. Seriously, if Musaylima had won that day, our world would look completely different.
Medina's forces won, but the cost was absolutely staggering. The battle was unbelievably bloody, and among the dead were a huge number of the Huffaz. These were the elite, the people who had memorized the entire Quran. They were the living, breathing hard drives of the faith.
And this is where crisis sparks innovation. The shock of losing so many of the Huffaz created this wave of panic among the leadership. What if the rest of them died in the next battle? Would the holy word itself be lost forever? That fear, that shock, was the direct reason they decided to compile the Quran into a single, written book for the very first time. Think about that. The war wasn't just building a state, it was literally shaping the Holy Scripture. So what happens after all the dust settles? Well, the legacy of the Ridda Wars is this deep, fascinating paradox. To save the community, they first had to wage a brutal war against it. Before the war, it was kind of fuzzy what being part of the Muslim community, the Ummah, really meant. Was it a spiritual thing, a loose military alliance?
The war answered that question with a sword. It meant you were part of a political state with a central government that demanded your loyalty. The violence erased all the gray areas. And out of that bloody conflict, for the very first time in history, Arabia was truly one unified political entity.
Okay, so what do you do now? You've got a unified Arabia, and you've got this tough, battle-hardened army that's just spent a year fighting itself. Well, you turn all that energy, all that military might, outward. The end of the Ridda Wars isn't the end of the story. It's the launching pad.
And you can see a clear path here. First, you crush all the revolts at home, unifying the peninsula by force. In doing that, you create an incredible, experienced veteran army. At the same time, you solidify this new idea that political and religious power are one and the same. And then, once your home base is secure, you point that army outwards, at the two superpowers of the day, the Byzantine and Sasanian empires.
And that is the single most important takeaway. The vast Islamic empire that erupted onto the world stage didn't just happen after the Ridda Wars. It happened because of them. The lessons they learned in that fire about unity, about power, about what a disciplined army could do, that became the exact blueprint for building an empire.
So it just leaves you with this massive question, right? What if Abu Bakr had failed? What if Khalid's army had been the one to break at Yamama? It's totally possible that Islam would have survived, sure, but maybe just as one small faith among many in Arabia. Maybe it never would have left the peninsula.
And that's really the final thought. The idea that Islam's survival and its explosion across the globe was somehow destined to happen, well, it wasn't. In that first fragile moment after Muhammad's death, its very existence as a single unified project was on the line. And in the end, that unity wasn't achieved through words or prayers. It was enforced.